Hi guys, welcome to my skills presentation for this week. This week I'm doing a continuation of masking. So last week I did like transitional masking, and this week I want to look more into like cinematography masking and like blurring certain objects out. Last week I said I was a 4 out of 10, but after reviewing this I believe I'm more of a 3 out of 10 to begin with, and I'll update you what I feel like my skill level is at the end. So my aims and objectives for this week, I would like to revisit transitions a bit. I feel like last week I was only able really to successfully complete one transition, and the rest of it was kind of building upon my mistakes. So this week I'd like to revisit transitions and actually try and create one without looking at a YouTube tutorial, just to know that it's really cemented into my head, and I would like to show like visible results. I would then like to look at additional masking concepts. So like I said last week, I looked at text and transitional masking, but building on the research I conducted last week, I want to look more into cinematography masking and blurring specific objects out, as this would be really useful for a grad project in case I need to blur out someone's face in the background or a number plate. I then had a reflection period at the end, just kind of going through my head what went well, what didn't go well, and I also want to make sure that I really understand this skill before moving on. I don't want to kind of like leave it in the dust, and not understand it before moving on. So that's the kind of period I had at the end. Here is just a quick slide of the resources I used. Some of them I used last week because I thought they were really helpful, so I thought I'd use them again. And then these three here are just completely new ones. They were also really helpful for developing cinematography masking and blur masking. So moving on to the research I conducted, last week I feel like I covered quite a lot of the fundamentals of cinematography masking and like what masking is in general, so I didn't want to repeat myself. However, I kind of adapted the way in which I wanted to consume the information. I normally dive straight into a YouTube tutorial, but this week I wanted to go onto the Adobe website and kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, and they had an abundance of information that was really helpful in like a written sense, and then I was able to watch a video they recommended and also transfer this into step-by-step notes, which I wanted to refer to instead of having to go back to the YouTube tutorial all the time. I then looked at two films, so one was Top Secret, made in 1984, and Chinatown in 1974, just to give me a bit of inspiration as to what I want my voyeur mask or binocular mask to look like. So here that has quite a lot of feathering, so I took that in mind when creating my practical. So this week's practical, I feel like maybe for some people it may be seen as a bit simple, but for me it was just a case of ironing out everything that I may have missed last week and just kind of making sure that I do understand basic masking. So for the first one, I managed to create this like binocular effect, just adding like the Gaussian blur effect there as well, and I did follow this tutorial at first. But then for my second attempt, I didn't actually use the tutorial, but I was able to like zoom in and then have the mask follow Priya and then zoom back out again, which I was really proud of. One problem that I did have with this one at first with the YouTube tutorial, when I went to zoom in on Priya, it would zoom out the mask as well. So like it wasn't just the video underneath that would zoom, it would be like the mask as well, and it didn't look very good. Whereas this one, I managed to figure it out myself by using the circle effect, and it worked much more effectively. So moving on to my next practical, I wanted to create like a Gaussian blur effect on Priya's face and have it track her face. Again, I did feel like at the beginning this was a bit basic. However, I'm really glad that I did cover it again because I was able to pick up bits that I didn't capture from last week. So this week I managed to use the tracking panel, which I didn't do last week, which is this button here, and it allowed the mask to track onto Priya's face as she walked from left to right. There were a few issues at the end, so I had to like go through and just like keep moving them around for each frame. But it was a really effective tool to learn, and I'm really glad that I managed to cover it this week. And then I was able to create this finished product, which worked really well. So for my final piece of practical, I wanted to create an effective transition and just make sure that by not watching a YouTube tutorial that I could do it. This definitely taught me the importance of making sure that you comprehend basic masking, because I kept making the same mistake with the stopwatch. I started moving my points but didn't press the stopwatch button, so it wasn't actually keyframing the entire time. So I wasted quite a bit of time doing that. But I'm glad I covered it again and made sure that I understand what that stopwatch does. And then I was able to create this effective transition that kind of shows like a character moving from one scene to another in like an effective and smooth way. In reflection, even though these masking techniques were far from a professional standard, it allowed me to recover elements from last week and make sure I could understand them. And next week, I'm exploring Lightroom and editing previous photos I have taken on my camera.